Hey everyone, this is Mike. I'm one of the associate instructors for W200, and this video and class prep is all about classroom management in a digital classroom. So for this week in W200, we're going to be talking a lot about one-to-one classrooms, BYOD classrooms. In other words, classrooms where students have access to devices during the class time. And maybe that's something they bring from home, which is BYOD or bring your own device, or maybe that's something that the school provides. And in any situation where you have students who have access to devices, that's called a one-to-one situation where they each have their own device. So one of the key things that comes up in that type of classroom environment, which doesn't get talked about a whole lot, is classroom management. How do you handle a learning environment where all of your students have access to digital devices? Because that looks a lot different than a traditional classroom where those devices aren't available, and there's some things to consider that are important to talk about and to start discussing. So that's what the plan is for this class prep. We'll talk a little bit about what that looks like, some common strategies, and then there'll be some questions about that as well. So that's the plan. Let's go ahead and get started. The first thing to talk about is just sort of big picture classroom management. And classroom management, unfortunately, doesn't always get talked about a lot during your pre-service education classes. It's a really, really important thing to think about and to discuss and to prepare for, but it doesn't always get the time it deserves. And so a lot of times when you first start out in the classroom, you might have some concerns about how do you handle the classroom in general, how do you handle the classroom with technology. So just some big picture ideas here. One of the most important things to think about when you're setting up your classroom and dealing with the classroom management side of things is to have clear and consistent expectations from that first day. So you want to have a plan in place for how you're going to handle things before school starts, so that you can lay out those expectations or build those expectations with the students. But the point is that things stay consistent in your classroom, because if you have expectations that you don't follow through with, or if you have consequences for misbehavior that you don't follow through with, then that can be really hard to sort of rein things back in later. So it's best to have very clear and consistent expectations that you stick with. The second point there says a large part of your first week will and should be spent getting students used to what life is like in your classroom. It makes things so much easier if, rather than jumping right into your content and all the material you have to cover, you spend some time establishing what your classroom culture is going to look like. What are the norms? What are the expectations? What's acceptable? What's unacceptable? How do you treat each other? What does respect look like in this classroom? And just getting everyone on the same page so that when students come into your classroom after that first week, they understand what it means to be in your class, how to treat each other, what that looks like, and what happens if they do misbehave. Because students, of course, are going to misbehave. That's always going to happen. And that's something you have to be prepared for. So my best advice here is don't rush to get to the content, because if you do rush through the opening part where you're trying to get these expectations set up, that can make the rest of the year a whole lot more challenging. The third point there, you've got a couple, these are sort of at opposite ends in the spectrum, but you've got teachers who'll say, don't smile until Christmas, start with very strict rules, don't let them see you smile, don't be friendly, very strict, stern, that side. And then I think at the opposite end of that side is this sort of social construction. So you're building rules together and you're building expectations together so that you come to a mutually agreed upon, or something where all the students agree that this is what this classroom dynamic should look like. This is how we should treat each other in this classroom. And I know a lot of teachers who sort of write up a social contract at the beginning of the semester who say, this is what we as a class have agreed upon are the expectations for this class, and this is what we're going to stick with. And so it's sort of that opposite of, do I as a teacher take all the control and set out exactly what I want this class to be, or is this going to be something that we build together? And I'm sure you've had teachers I think we've all had teachers at the left side, the don't smile, very stern side, and at least from my experience, I've had some who are on that opposite side as well. But that's kind of a place you have to find yourself of where you fall in that spectrum and what you want your classroom to look like. This last point, it is a really hard thing to figure out. Classroom management is tough regardless of the type of environment you find yourself in, but of course some classroom situations are going to be harder than others also. It's also something that's not talked about a lot. So any opportunity you get to observe teachers and to talk about with them about what they're doing and what works and what doesn't work, that is always incredibly valuable experience that you can apply to your future classroom. So those are just some very big picture general ideas, and I hope those are helpful in sort of talking about where we're going from here. So when it comes to technology, a lot of times people will separate technology classroom management from general classroom management. So you have your normal rules of how to treat each other, not to interrupt, when to line up, how to walk through the hallway, all those types of things. And then you have your technology rules. But I think what works best, and from the teachers I've worked with and my own experience, you don't want to separate those two out. Classroom management and technology management, it's all part of the same thing. It's all part of having a classroom that functions how you want it to, where people are respecting each other, where they're respecting the learning materials and the classroom resources, and where they're working together collaboratively. So I think the first part in doing that is to not seeing technology management and classroom management in two separate things. And part of that is the second point here of giving students a chance to practice with their devices. They might not be used to using technology in an educational setting, especially at the younger grades. So you've got to give them time to practice what you want them to do. And they're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. And there's going to be a learning curve for them to get used to how they should use the technology in the classroom and what your expectations are for them. This third point can also be hard if you're not using technology regularly. Then when you bring technology in, all of a sudden it's this new exciting thing and they're all excited about it and trying to use it in ways that you might not want to. So if you are in a situation where you have technology in your classroom, BYOD, one-to-one, even a computer lab in the school, the more often you can use that and get kids set in a routine, the better. And then this last time is give the kids a chance to play. They're going to be able to figure out a lot of stuff on their own. That they might not necessarily be great at it at first. I think it's a common misconception that we think, oh, just because they grew up with tablets in their hands, they know how to use everything we want them to use. That's not necessarily true, but they will be quick to figure things out. They'll be quick to learn new things. So giving students just a chance to play around with things can be a great way to get started with a new technology or a new app or resource or whatever you're using. So those are some general thoughts. Another major point to think about, we use Symbaloo in W200, which is a great resource, but students are going to stumble onto inappropriate stuff. Regardless of what filters your school has in place, it's going to happen. They're going to get to websites that you don't necessarily want them to get to, and you have to be prepared for having that discussion with your students and having to work towards responsibility with them of, okay, what do you do when you get to a site like this or a resource like this that may not be appropriate for school? What sorts of actions should you take? So these resources can help a lot. SafeShare School, SchoolTube, Symbaloo, even Google Docs with links or a class website. Those are great. They also help simplify things because students aren't having to type in links all the time. But just be prepared for the fact that students are going to go to places that you don't necessarily want them to go to, and that's something that does happen in the classroom. Talking a little bit about methods. So there's also a misconception that as soon as you put, an iPad or a computer in front of a student, they're going to be engaged because it's new or flashy or interesting. And that's not always the case. If you're asking students to do a digital worksheet, that can be just as boring as a physical worksheet, regardless of the fact that they're on a computer or an iPad. So giving them more engaging tasks, production tasks that we've talked about, things where the students are making videos or creating like a Chatterpix or something like that, that can also help be engaging. Not that this is practical every single day of every single week, but in general, it's a better way to keep kids active and engaged with the learning process rather than just some sort of digital worksheet. There are lots of device specific solutions, and maybe some of you had some of these at your previous K-12 schools, which would be cool to hear about and we can talk about during class this week. But these types of solutions allow for the teacher to have control over what the students see on their device, so you can push out a certain tab or screen, or you can black out the screen, or you can send out a notification to all the screens. Something so that if you want the students to get to a specific place, you can push that out to their devices so that they get there. And those types of solutions do exist. Some districts have those, some don't. They can be very expensive at times. And students can always figure out ways around them as well. So maybe they're using the Wi-Fi from their mobile device and just tethering to that. So that way they're not on the school Wi-Fi, and then they can access whatever they want to on their device. So while these can be effective solutions for certain scenarios, a lot of times it's better to still teach we'll talk about digital citizenship here in a moment, but just don't necessarily rely on these solutions to be the end-all be-all for classroom management. You'll still have students who can figure out ways to get around these types of solutions as well. But they can still be really helpful in general for keeping students on the same page where you want them to. So, speaking of digital citizenship, a big part of using devices in the classroom is teaching kids how to interact not only with each other, but with every other person online that they're going to be interacting with. If they're posting things or sharing things or adding videos to YouTube, they're going to have to deal with comments, which can, as you probably know, be really negative. They might be commenting on each other's videos as well. And so the idea of digital citizenship is that you're teaching your students to be responsible, positive citizens in an online space. And that looks like a lot of different things, which we'll talk about more throughout the semester. But the general idea is just like being a good citizen means treating other people with respect and dignity and things like that. The same goes for being a digital citizen online. And we'll talk more about Common Sense Media later in the semester, but there are a lot of great resources there that you can use in the classroom. But the important thing here is that you're thinking about how can we incorporate ideas of digital citizenship into every classroom and not just like a computer class, because it should be spread throughout all the different subject areas when you're doing technology-based activities. Here's some specific ideas and strategies just based on what other teachers have found helpful, and we'll go through these pretty quickly. But some things that have been most beneficial are things like having extra devices in case a student loses or breaks their device or loses privileges, having a guest log on in case the students forget their passwords, or having a teacher directory of passwords. Making sure students save everything to the cloud makes it so much easier, so they can't say, oh, I lost my work, I can't find my work, I deleted my work. It's all backed up in the cloud. This is really good for elementary and middle school, having large printouts of icons or apps, so you can just say, hey, we're going to this one, and hold up the picture or point to the picture on your lesson board or something like that. Saves a lot of time. And then having some place where the students can put their devices away, on the desk, on the back of their chair, inside their desk, a basket in the center of your groups of desks, but just somewhere where you know that it's out of their hands for those times that when you want to talk to them without their devices, you can see instantly, okay, everyone's got their device away. Other things to think about, logistics, and this gets overlooked all the time, and it's really, really important to think about. What if a kid brings a device and it's not charged? Are you going to have extra chargers in your classroom? Is that part of the school policy? Are you going to handle it in your classroom? What if a device gets broken or a student forgets it? How are you going to manage that? And some of the things we talked about on the last slide can help, having an extra device, having a charger station in your classroom. What about when the Wi-Fi goes down or the computers aren't working? This happens a lot. So it's good to have a backup plan or to have things that you can do offline as well. And then thinking about how can I set up my physical classroom environment. Maybe kids don't have to be stuck at their desk all the time. Maybe they can move around and you can have a more open learning space for them as well. But so overall, the main ideas here and the big thing, be thinking about this before your first day. Have a very clear idea in place of how you're going to approach this. And not that it can't shift, throughout the semester or over your years, but just have thought about all this and have some very clear ideas in place of how you want to handle this. Talk to other teachers in whatever school you end up. Talk to other teachers that you've had in your past and find what is going to work for you, for your teaching style in your classroom. The second point, like we talked about, don't separate out technology management and classroom management. It's all part of the same big thing of having a smoothly running classroom. Point 3, things are not always going to work as expected. You've seen in W200, things go wrong. Technology doesn't always work like you hope it to, and that can be really, really frustrating, but it's part of, not everything in the classroom is going to go as expected. There'll be surprise assemblies and fire drills and all sorts of things. That's just the nature of education. Things happen that you don't expect, and you've got to be ready to roll with that all the time, which, sometimes can be fun. You can have a really unexpected learning opportunity that you never thought about. Sometimes it can be frustrated. That's just sort of the nature of the job. The next point, be prepared for your students to make mistakes and use technology in ways you don't want them to. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to do things you don't want. Try to treat it as a learning opportunity for that student and for the whole class so that you can reinforce what your expectations are, what your consequences are, how technology should be used in your classroom, and all those things. And of course, keep calm and teach on. It's going to be okay. Technology is another tool in the classroom, just like all the other tools we use, and there are benefits and there are challenges, and you will be able to handle it, especially since you're thinking about all these things this whole time during your pre-service teaching, which is awesome, and that will prepare you so well for going out into the field and having a really great idea of what you want your classroom to look like. So you're going to be great, but spend some time thinking about what you want your class to look like before that first day starts. So I hope some of these ideas were helpful for you. And next up, we've got a few questions from the class prep. So thanks for watching, and see you this week in W200.